An uptick in violent and often random attacks on Toronto's transit system put the TTC and the city on alert that more needs to be done to ensure public safety. With us now for their insight on the causes and possible solutions, John Donino, president of the Amalgamated Transit Union Canada, Diana Chan McNally, harm reduction case manager at All Saints Toronto, a downtown mission, and Lex Harvey, transportation reporter for the Toronto Star. Welcome all of you to our studios.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so Lex, I'm going to start with you. You've crunched some numbers, of course, as a transportation reporter for the Toronto Star. It feels like we've seen story after story of an assault or an attack. Is violence actually going up? Is it on the rise on public transit?
Yeah, so in the past couple weeks, obviously, we've seen a very alarming series of violent attacks on transit, but this is all occurring within the broader context of violent crime increasing on Toronto's subway system. So if we look back at 2019, the TTC tracks the number of violent offenses against customers every year. So those are the most serious offenses where police tend to get involved. So in 2019, we had about 666 of those. And then we only have data up until November from last year, but it was 923 last year. And we have to consider that it's only about 2/3 of the riders at most. So we ended the year with about 68% of weekday riders compared to before the pandemic. So more violent incidents, fewer riders.
Okay. Something that also people are looking at and sort of something you've looked at is this happening in cities outside of Canada, particularly to our neighbors to the south?
Yeah, so it is a trend that we're seeing across Canada as well as in American cities. New York has seen a worrying increase on its subway system. Last year, they had more than 10 murders, which was I think a 20-year high. I would have to fact check that, but definitely, very, very concerning there. Philadelphia, Chicago. So this is something that we're seeing kind of across the board in North America, not just in Toronto.
John, I'm going to come to you. You are the president of ATU Canada. You represent workers all across this province. What about other cities in Ontario and in Canada?
So we're seeing the uptick right across the country broadly. We're seeing anywhere between a 7 and 10% increase. And those are only the numbers that are coming forward to us today. Agencies have not been reporting accurately and efficiently as we would like them to. And so we're still waiting for the year-end results for 2022. But I will say that this uptick in violence is not just in Canada. We're an international union, and we're seeing the same kind of uptick in the United States south of the border. In fact, as I sit here today, we had our second murder of a transit operator yesterday in the DC area. So we've had 2 ATU members die from shootings in the last 3 days.
You had mentioned sort of how much gets reported. I'm curious, what constitutes a reported incident of violence? Because there is some pretty strict and stringent sort of rules.
So the best we're seeing from the transit agencies is they categorize the violence against our staff, our operators, on a level 1, level 2, and level 3. And, most times they're only reporting those injuries that are an aggravated assault or those that involve weapons. The simple assaults like being threatened or being spat on or punched or pushed are being underreported. And even our frontline staff aren't reporting all of those incidences. And that's why we say that there are thousands of assaults being reported annually, and there's thousands more that are unreported.
With that being said, are people just reporting these incidences more in sort of this time lapse that we're seeing right now? Are people just reporting more incidences, or are people experiencing more attacks?
People are experiencing more attacks and more violent attacks. As I said, previously it was being spat on, punched, pushed, threatened. But now we're seeing the uptick in the violence is becoming more and more severe. And what we're not seeing, and what we're not gauging, and when I say we, the transit agencies, is not just the physical harm that's being imposed on our people, but the emotional and trauma and the long-term effects of PTSD that are affecting our people from being able to return to work and being able to return to work safely.
All right, Diana, I'm gonna come to you. You work in a pretty central part of this city. You are a transit rider yourself. Do you think people feel unsafe on transit?
Well, if I'm speaking about my community and we're talking about people who are actively unhoused, yes, they feel unsafe on transit because they feel like they're being targeted. I think we have two very separate but very visible phenomena that are actually happening on the TTC right now. One would be violence, and the other would be people who are unsheltered, who are actually taking shelter on the TTC. I think it's unfortunate that we are conflating these two, and we're seeing that there is some targeting. We've seen videos of police specifically targeting people who are unhoused on the TTC, and we see them going in and out of transit, not being able to actually rest for a moment, but they also have nowhere else to go. So for my folks, yes, they feel unsafe, but probably for different reasons than other people may cite as feeling unsafe.
And when you say there's nowhere else to go, we're talking about our shelters pretty much bursting at the seams.
Yeah.
This is a place where a lot of people might be taking it just to stay out of the cold and just ride loops of transit, of routes over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. Before the pandemic, we actually had drop-in space that was open 24/7. So people had somewhere that they could go, even if it wasn't actively a shelter bed. There was some place that they could be that was safe and that would actually have supports on site. That has been eliminated. And what we've seen is that people take up de facto shelter in other locations, and that includes hospital ERs, that includes libraries, that includes coffee shops like Tim Hortons, and then it also includes the TTC. So we are forcing people into these spaces because we are actually not fulfilling their right to adequate shelter.
All right, so in light of all of this, we reached out to the TTC chair, Councillor John Burnside of Ward 16, Don Valley East, about what's being done about the attacks on transit. Here's part of what he sent in a statement. In the short term, we are turning to Toronto Police Services, security teams, and additional special constables to keep us safe. We have streets to homes workers on our system now and are adding more. While we're doing everything we can to keep our riders and employees safe, the TTC can't fix the underlying causes of homelessness, mental illness, and addiction. That's why Mayor Tory and I have committed to investing in all aspects of community safety. Diana, there are some parts that I want to pick up on there, some language there, some words of mention of mental illness, those experiencing homelessness and addiction. What are your thoughts on just that statement alone? And again, does it seem like there's some conflation here with those two?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of stigma that is attached to being unhoused, where we make an assumption that someone who is unhoused is constantly in crisis, someone who's experiencing mental illness. And you're in crisis insofar as you don't have any kind of shelter. So to a certain extent, you are in survival mode. But I think we are absolutely conflating that safety issues are because we have people who are unsheltered on the TTC. And I think that's incredibly unfair. I think that's stigmatizing. And I don't think that's actually addressing the issue. If we look at who is committing these attacks, it is not tied to any one demographic, but we are actively targeting this group, which I would call a form of bigotry.
Lex, I'm going to come to you. I think I know the answer to this, but when speaking with the experts that you speak to when you're covering Transit Beat, what do we know about the correlation of mental health and violence? Is there one?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with a lot of what Diana just said. I think we can't be pinning violence on one singular factor like that. The data just really doesn't support it, and I think it can be very detrimental when we scapegoat a certain group of people in that way. What I've heard from speaking to public health experts, other advocates like Diana, is that what we need to consider here is the combination of factors right now. A lot of people are really struggling. They have been for a long time, but many things that were exacerbated during the pandemic, such as our affordable housing crisis, our shelter system is really overburdened. People are struggling to afford basic necessities. And then in terms of mental health care, like only people who can afford it really receive that kind of support. And so while we need to be careful to link one of these particular things to violence, I think it's more what we're seeing is a confluence of factors all happening at the same time. And, someone might be in a situation where they don't have a safe place to call home, and at the same time they're not getting support and they don't have basic goods, and those kinds of situations really, I think, increase the propensity for someone to be in crisis.
John, I saw you nodding your head. I want to get your take on that as well.
Yeah, I would agree. It's not just about the mental health. There's so many different components here that we need to address. And, when we asked for the task force, and I'm sure we're going to speak about it today, but when we asked about the task force, we said that policing wasn't the only solution. We referred to mental health issues. But my own experience just recently, I was in a subway station and someone was in crisis. And the police responded to that incident. And all they did was take that individual, put them on a train, and move them along the system. That individual in crisis did not get the help they need. But I want to be clear, when we ask for some of these things, people who are suffering from mental health issues are not the only offenders. And I don't want to categorize that it's strictly about the mental health like the speakers before me. So I think that's important from the ATU perspective, that we're not just categorizing those with mental health as the people or the culprits in these acts of violence.
All right, let's pull up some stats on how the city is responding. The City of Toronto released this just the other day, saying it would provide the TTC with 20 community safety ambassadors, an additional 50 security guards, and more de-escalation training for TTC staff. This is on top of the 80 Toronto police officers and more uniformed TTC employees and more. John, is this enough?
Well, it's not enough. And so, unless you have the resources and the funding models to support those kinds of initiatives, there are going to be shortfalls in how these things roll out. And the viability of public transit is at risk right now because we haven't regained pre-pandemic levels. But it needs to go beyond that. You can't just give somebody a crash course for 4 hours on de-escalation and think you've done your job. This needs to be an ongoing process with refresher trainings and an ongoing commitment, not just a reactive measure in crisis mode. And that's what we're asking for. And again, that's why in the task force, we left it open vaguely, because we need to come together, figure out what the root cause problems of these assaults are and this violence, and how we tackle these things on the broader spectrum.
Lex, when speaking with transit riders, you've done a number of sort of conversations, exposés on the start of that. Do they want to see more security and police?
I think it's hard to have one response. I mean, we have more than 1 million people who take the TTC every day. So there are many different people who feel different ways. I think there are certainly people who feel like they would feel more safe with more police on the system. But at the same time, we know that Toronto Police's own data shows that racialized Torontonians are more likely to have worse outcomes with police. So, for example, Black and Indigenous riders in particular maybe are not feeling as safe with police, or they may feel less safe having police there. I think most riders I've spoken to say that there needs to be more of a coordinated approach here, considering some of the root causes that might be driving this violence, rather than just policing away a problem that can't be policed away.
All right, Diane, I'm going to come to you. We're going to pick up on a couple of thoughts that Lex had mentioned. But over the weekend, there were still more reports of attacks, despite this announcement last week that, we are going to bring in more police. Do we know if more security and more police will keep workers and passengers safe?
That is not evidence-based at all. And I think, at the heart of it, what we're suggesting, because the narrative is very much about people experiencing crisis, and I appreciate that others are pointing out that that is not exclusively the case, but we're saying that if people are in mental health crisis, the answer is to police them. That is suggesting that if you are in crisis, you are a criminal. I think that's an extremely problematic response. And even if we have people like myself, a crisis worker, who are going into these spaces, where are we going to take people? If they're unhoused, they have nowhere to go. If they are experiencing crisis, we don't have enough community-based mental health supports to actually provide people with the kind of support that they need. So I don't see that this is effective in any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, again, I think it makes people feel very unsafe in a lot of cases, especially if they're marginalized, and particularly for my folks who are unhoused, who are over-policed, they don't feel safe.
All right, I'm going to go read another Toronto Star article. This is from the perspective of Matt Elliott, who wrote an opinion piece earlier this week in the Toronto Star. Rewind a decade ago, and riding the system used to be more routine interactions with TTC workers. You'd board streetcars by the front door and pay at a fare box next to the operator. Entering a station generally meant going past a booth with a real-life person selling tokens. There were at least 2 employees on every subway train, a driver and, of course, a guard who would be responsible for making sure platforms were clear and doors were safely closed. These days, all of that has changed. John, it feels like there are less workers on the system. Is this a factor when we're talking about safety and security?
Absolutely a factor. As we sit here today, the TTC is positioning itself to remove the guard's position on subway trains. We're going from a 2-person operation to a 1-person operation. I think it's unconscionable to think that the safety of our riders is paramount when you're removing 50% of your resources from that vehicle. It's a 500-foot train that's moving in rush hour with 2,000 people on board, and we're cutting back. How is the operator of that train supposed to safely maneuver that train through tunnels, through stations, but see 500 feet behind them and ensure the safety of their passengers? we're seeing the cuts. We're seeing technology take over. You cannot take the human element out of the service we provide and the frontline service and the visibility. And so I think that the TTC needs to rethink their position when it comes to cutting jobs. I think they need more visibility and more customer service.
Lex, ridership is down. There are less workers, it seems. Service is a bit spotty than what it used to be. And, people are afraid to go on. They're probably opting for ride sharing like Uber. What impact will this have on the city in transit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I loved that article that you mentioned by Matt. I think he hit the nail on the head in terms of what riders have been telling me as well, which is that they feel more safe when there are more people on the system. And so I think increasing ridership is actually a really big part of the solution here. And then in terms of what's going to happen from here, well, as you mentioned, we're seeing with this proposed budget, if it gets approved in a couple weeks, that service is going to be cut even further, fares are going to go up. And so I think, transportation experts have been telling me that the consequence of that, might be even fewer riders. And so that could increase this dilemma for us. And of course, if people are feeling unsafe, that's kind of further adding to the problem. I think it's really important to be clear here that while these attacks that have happened have been frequent, they are rising and they are unacceptable. As a whole, our transit system does remain safe for the vast majority of people. But safety is one thing, perception of safety is another thing that's important and powerful here. And even if the odds of someone actually getting targeted on their subway trip are really low, if that person's just not feeling safe, they're going to opt for other modes of transportation. And that'll lead to us having fewer people on the system and ultimately less revenue and sending our system into a place where we don't want it to go.
I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like with on that note of perception, the number of people that I've had reach out to me being, are you on the subway? Are you on the train today? Are you okay? Take some extra cautions. Perception is a very, very strong tool. Diana, I want to come to you. We've heard in the reporting that there are some solutions, and we're hoping to get some solutions from you. Can you give us a couple of examples of what potentially some solutions could be to addressing safety on transit?
Well, as I said, it's certainly not police. Again, I'm speaking in terms
Do they have any role in safety at all on transit?
They don't address crime in a preventative fashion. They can address it perhaps after it happens, but what value is that ultimately in this kind of space? I think it's pretty limited. Someone like me, a crisis worker, again, we come in when someone has gotten to the point of going into crisis, which is to say that we didn't provide them with enough support or resources prior to that, and they've gotten to this point. So people like me, even if we are investing in crisis workers on the TTC, what are we doing to address the fact that people are still going to continue going into crisis? We go in for a little while, we help, but then what? I believe fully in investing in upstream solutions. And I know that's a little bit of a nerdy phrase, but this to say
what is upstream solution?
Things that actually address the root causes of why people are experiencing crisis. And we can talk about things like income inequality. We can talk about housing not being available, not having enough mental health supports for people. We're coming out of a pandemic. Everybody's still stressed out, and that's completely valid. And I don't think we're actually actively supporting that. So we should not be investing in these after the fact emergency kinds of supports. We need to give people what they need to be well so that they don't enter into a state of crisis.
All right, John, you've appealed to all levels of government for a national transit task force you had mentioned earlier. What would a real solution look like coming from a task force like that?
So obviously we need to engage all levels of government, municipalities, and transit agencies. This is not just about the City of Toronto for the ATU. This is about Canada as a whole. We're seeing this problem right across the nation. We need to come up with concrete plans on how we can mitigate some of these risks, understanding that we're not going to eliminate them all. Far too often we see the agencies imposing reactive measures. I think a more strategic plan on how we enhance safety, not only for our frontline staff, but for the riders, needs to be uniform across this country from agency to agency. We talk about de-escalation training, mental health awareness training. We talk about criminal code reforms, in particular, the Criminal Code 26901, which is about assaults against our operators. And so, increased police visibility is great. It brings a sense of comfort to the riders, but it doesn't address the fundamental problems. I look at the TTC here today, And if we are really want to address these issues, I can't understand in today's technology why we don't have cell service in subway stations, so that when somebody's in crisis or when there's an incident happening, that our commuters can access all of the services that are needed in real time, other waiting for a customer service representative to address it, or pulling a fire alarm, or cutting power. There needs to be a way in today's world where our riders can feel safe by being able to dial 911 when the situation is happening in real time.
All right, we have a couple seconds left, John. I'm going to ask you, ridership is down. That's a big source of revenue for the TTC. How will public transit get what it needs for it to be safe for not only its passengers, but its workers?
Well, I think again, this is where all levels of government need to come into play. I think we need dedicated operational funding, and we need support from all levels of government to invest in public transit from a social housing perspective, from a mental health perspective, from a climate change perspective. And we need to bring more people into the transit systems, not less. And I know Lex said something the other day that caught my mind, and that is reducing service and increasing fares is a downward spiral of what is going to look like an inadequate transit system right across this country.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. John, Lex, Diana, thank you so much for a really great conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.